In my talk today, I will draw on my current research project of writing a feminist genealogy of automathographies, a concept denoting the autobiographical desire of becoming a mathematician, which was coined by Paul Halmos back in 1985. By gendering Halmos' desire, what I argue is that it is essential to throw light onto the social, cultural, and political practices that some women mathematicians deployed in surpassing the restrictions and limitations of their gender position and follow an academic career in the field of mathematical sciences. In thus working genealogically, I look at the personal, literary, and philosophical writings of 6 women mathematicians: the Italian Maria Gaetana Agnesi, the French Amélie de Châtelet and Sophie Germain, the Scottish Mary Somerville, the English Ada Lovelace, the Russian Sofia Kovalevskaya. My research has also shown that there is a Chinese woman mathematician and astronomer, Wang Zhenyi, who lived and worked in the 18th century and also wrote poetry and beautiful travel diaries and essays. But apart from some short biographical entries, her writings have not been translated in English or in any other European language I could have access to. So even standard bibliographical research is limited in her case. I hope that in the future there will be a project that will make her writings accessible to Anglophone readers and beyond. To return to the European women then, apart from their mathematical and scientific work, they wrote philosophical essays like Amélie de Châtelet, Maria Gaetana Agnesi, Sophie Germain, and Ada Lovelace. Mary Somerville wrote an autobiography, while Sofia Kovalevskaya wrote poetry, novels, and theatrical plays. In today's talk, however, I will focus on the philosophical work of Sophie Germain, as in my view, she has made a significant but neglected contribution to what I would call processual approaches to social theory. Moreover, her transdisciplinary approach, avant la lettre, of course, needs to be considered in the context of reshaping disciplinary boundaries. Speaking of reshaping boundaries, an important part of my research in this project, as in previous ones, is the fact that as a feminist sociologist, I have been working in archives and with different types of archival documents, analog, digital, digitized, and photographed, and thus the archive has been my fieldwork over the course of many years. Archival research in the social sciences in general, and sociology in particular, is on the rise, not only in the wake of the recent pandemic, but also, and more importantly, because of the digital revolution, as well as the continuous encouragement of funding bodies for the use of secondary data. Last but not least, more and more researchers are using data from social media platforms in the form of texts and visual documents. This textual turn, whether in archives or other media, is reshaping the boundaries of our methodological approaches, but they have not been systematized yet, and they cannot become easily transferable. It is this epistemological gap that we addressed with other feminist sociologist colleagues in the UK when we wrote the book The Archive Project, archival research in the social sciences. From my genealogical perspective, inspired by Michel Foucault's insights, in this book, as elsewhere in my work, I have problematized the archive as a site of power knowledge production, but also as a space wherein women's grey, dusty, and marginalized documents can be excavated in tracing the long process of their constitution as subjects in the early and late modern periods in Europe. What I have also argued is that the archive should be taken as a living organism and not as a static entity of shelves, files, boxes, and documents, thus drawing parallels between the archive and the field as we know it in sociology. In this context, let us return to Sophie Germain and her relation to sociology and social theory, and I read here a tribute to her work from one of the founders of sociology, Auguste Comte. We would imperfectly appreciate the high range of Mademoiselle Sophie Germain if we limited ourselves to consider her as a mathematician, whatever the eminent merit she demonstrated in mathematics. Her excellent posthumous discourse, published in 1833, on the state of science and the letters in the different periods of their culture, indicates in her a very lofty philosophy, both wise and energetic, of which very few superior minds have such a clear and profound feeling today. I will always attach the highest value to the general conformity that I saw in this writing with my own way of conceiving the whole intellectual development of humanity. Auguste Comte included this lengthy reference to Sophie Germain's philosophical work in the second volume of his major corpus, Cours de philosophie positive, first published in 1835, only 4 years after Germain's untimely death in 1831. What made the founder of sociology to praise so highly a woman who was mostly known as a mathematician in the Parisian academic circles in the first half of the 19th century? While forgotten after her death, Germain's contribution to the mathematical sciences has been revisited in recent years with a small but growing body of literature revolving around her life and mathematical work. Even in this literature, however, her philosophical writings remain broadly undiscussed, and they have not been translated in English yet. But in thinking about Germain's ideas, let's have a glimpse into the biographical matrix they emerged from. She grew up in Paris in the wake of the French Revolution. She never got a formal education, but she read widely in her father's library, and then later, using the pseudonym of Monsieur Leblanc, managed to obtain lecture notes for courses from the newly organized École Polytechnique in Paris. This is how she met famous mathematicians and scientists of the French Institute who supported her work and education. Her early work was in number theory, a subject which occupied her throughout her life, and in the context of this interest, in 1801, she initiated a correspondence with the now famous Carl Friedrich Gauss under her male pseudonym of Monsieur Leblanc. Germain also got interested in the physics of acoustics, and this is how she decided to take part in a contest initiated by the Paris Academy of Science for a mathematical account of the phenomena exhibited in experiments on vibrating plates. After two failed attempts in 1811 and 1813, she finally won the prize in 1816, the first woman to have done so, and thus established herself as a mathematician, but also as an important contributor in elastic theory, which also influenced her philosophical work, as we will further see. Her other contribution is in the spheres of philosophy and social theory. Her work of classifying facts and generalizing them as laws was influential for later thinkers as Auguste Comte, as we have already seen. She died at the age of 55 after being diagnosed with breast cancer, and an honorary degree by the University of Göttingen was conferred upon her 6 years after her death on the recommendation of Gauss. It is thus to her philosophical writings that I now turn, which were published posthumously in 1833 by her nephew, and I read here from his intro. These pages, found in Mademoiselle Germain's papers, were not intended for printing. She wrote them in the moments when the severe pains to which she had succumbed did not allow her to devote herself in the study of mathematical sciences that had made her famous. In his view, Germain's essay was an unfinished substitute for her real scientific work, which she was unable to pursue in the last months of her life when suffering from breast cancer, and it was because of her lack of time that the work remained unfinished. Guglielmo Libri, a fellow mathematician, friend, as well as her first biographer, seems to follow this evaluation, and he only devotes one paragraph to it in his obituary. We have also found in her papers immense works on history, on geography, in particular that of the ancients, and on the natural sciences, and also very fine philosophical reflections, because she had been much occupied with metaphysics. He wrote about this work. When Hippolyte Stipe created a second publication of her philosophical work, he wrote a lengthy introduction in which he claimed that this work must have started much earlier. So let us look at this work more carefully. Germain's unfinished essay comprises two chapters. In the first, she formulates the simple thesis that the human mind is subject to laws, and the character of truth is a spontaneous feeling of order and proportion. Both the sciences and the letters are therefore dominated by this feeling, which is common to them. And in this vein, order, proportion, and simplicity are intellectual necessities, eventually leading to the universal type of the beautiful and the true. Since Germain was first and foremost a mathematician, she drew, of course, on the field of mathematical sciences, and thus the concepts of symmetry and analogy are at the heart of her philosophical writings. After the statement of this principle, Germain compares the impressions we get from fictional and scientific works and concludes that there are no important differences between them. In making these comparisons, she carefully demonstrates the identity of intellectual processes, both in poetry and in science, by showing that there is a continuous interchange of feelings, imagination, and rational reasoning in the way they unfold, and thus pursues these parallel intellectual movements between poetry and science in the realization of the work. In concluding the first chapter of the essay, Germain is therefore able to exclaim, "Ah, we can no longer doubt it. The sciences, the letters, and the fine arts were born out of one and the same feeling." Her transdisciplinary approach is thus a bold movement at a time when disciplines were shaping their boundaries within very rigid structures. In the second chapter, Germain follows a historical investigation of her principles through different periods in science and culture. In doing so, she brings together philosophy, ontology, and metaphysics in theorizing the social, very much, I argue, like what Gabriel Tarde did in his project of microsociology in the end of the 19th century. Germain, like Tarde after her, made the study of science in general and the mathematical sciences in particular central to her philosophical propositions. Thus, while showing the alliance between mathematics and the natural sciences, Germain also extended the importance of calculation to social, moral, and political questions. Being firmly convinced that the laws of being do not only govern the facts which are in the field of sciences, she argues that these laws also apply to the social, political, and cultural domains. Drawing on her scholarship on elasticity theory, and particularly the theorem relating to the short duration of the action of disturbing causes, she explains how the true and the just constantly tend to remove the obstacles that oppose their manifestation. She further demonstrates the progressive tendencies towards the annihilation of actions which disturb the natural order in all moral, social, and political phenomena. This is the point of the most interesting connection she draws between rational mechanics and social and political science by juxtaposing the two cases of stable and unstable equilibrium. When a system is idle, she notes, this may be due to essentially different conditions. However, when a cause comes to act on the system, two things can happen. It will either return to its initial position and the balance will be restored, stable equilibrium, or the system will be removed from its initial position and it will return to calm state only after having passed through an entirely different situation, unstable equilibrium. It is clear how these two states can be transposed into social and political systems. There are sometimes agitations in the socio-political system, producing slight movements that stop on their own. But other times, we see complete revolutions which will allow the state of interior peace to be reborn only after great changes in the social order. Germain's attempt to transpose the states of the stable and unstable equilibrium to social and political phenomena brings in mind Gabriel Tarde's philosophy of society and his argument that all things are societies, or associations in Bruno Latour's exposition of Tardian sociology. In drawing relations between mechanical and social systems, Germain, like Tard, is interested in interlocking monads in the sense of individual social and political attitudes. States governed without regard to social tendencies retain intertranquility as long as no events comes to agitate their spirits. But the slightest circumstance is enough to shake society to its foundations, she observes. When trouble comes, it is necessary either to oppose powerful obstacles to it or to know how to conform to their requirements, she writes, thinking scientifically about the events that shook France throughout the 19th century by pointing to the critical difference between precarious and sustainable tranquility. And it is not only social systems that she considers in this development of the mechanics of the social. In the same way that all points in a system endowed with gravity tend to be placed as near as possible to the center of the earth, all individuals in a social system tend towards well-being in a relation within which the well-being of each harms as little as possible that of the others. Motion and gravity are further used as analogies to illustrate balance and the effects of impulses. In further thinking about the dynamics of the social, Germain notes that societies are made up of three main elements: interest, passions, inertia, which individuals bring together in their way of being, as well as in their social attitudes, thus forming many different characters. Individual behaviors thus correspond to the physical attitudes of hard, elastic, and soft bodies, respectively. Of course, individual attitudes depend on social and political conditions, Germain argues. By creating a typology of characters and attitudes in analogical correspondence with physical bodies, Germain, the mathematician, observes that although we have not yet imagined making a statistics of characters, we know by experience that more than half of the population act according to their interests, while the other half are either taken by their passions or they are just inert. Germain's observation that there can be no absolute states, either in physical bodies or in characters, reverberates with Tard's important statement that to exist is to differ, and that difference is, in a sense, the truly substantial side of things. In reading Germain's philosophical essay, it is impossible not to think of Kant's image of sociology as social physics, which subsequently led to the wider elaboration of his positive philosophy. But Germain did not follow the principles of positive philosophy. As a matter of fact, positive philosophy was consolidated after her death. What I rather argue is that her work should be mapped in processual approaches in sociology, that is, theoretical frameworks that emphasize the dynamic and ongoing nature of social phenomena. These approaches focus on understanding social processes, changes, and interactions over time. Some key aspects of processual approaches to sociology include emphasis on change, temporal perspectives, as well as attention to complexities and non-linearities. Germain was indeed interested in history and therefore in time, while considering the constitution of historical events. But thinking as a mathematician and ahead of her times, she also considers space and time as constant and measurable entities in their interrelation. Space and time, this is what man sets out to measure. One circumscribes his momentary existence, the other accompanies his successive existence. Germain is still far from taking space-time as a continuum, and yet she points to movement as a necessary relation linking space and time, further suggesting that unlike human beings who are continuously modified, as soon as it is constant and uniform, space is known by time. Time is measured by space. In the development of her philosophical discourse, Germaine is thus adamant that science, literature, and the fine arts were born out of one and the same feeling, and their intellectual processes obey the same laws and run in parallel, as already discussed. In the same vein, Bruno Latour has shown that in his major philosophical work, Monadology and Sociology, Tarde did not respect any border between nature and society. He actually pointed to the fallacy of this epistemological approach, and in this context, he did not attempt to explain the lower levels, that is, the individual, by reference to the higher levels, that is, the social, as Durkheim did, of course. To conclude, despite its brevity, as well as its fragmented and unfinished state, Germain's philosophical work is an unrecognized trace of processual approaches to philosophy and social theory in the 19th century, but also a rare and bold transdisciplinary move, particularly considering that not only did she attempt to engage in the philosophical debates of her time, but she also tried to transpose concepts from physics and mechanics to the social, cultural, and political realm, as well as to individual characters, attitudes, and trends entangled with them, thus surpassing the individual society divide that both Tarde and Latour have rebuked in their take of the social. Latour has famously declared that his actor network theory had a forefather, Gabriel Tarde, but it seems that the famous professor of sociology at the Collège de France, who worked to establish his system of social laws at the turn of the 19th century, already had at least an important foremother in the philosophical work of Sophie Germain, although this intellectual heritage has not been recognized or acknowledged. And yet, processual approaches to sociology can illuminate current attempts to cross boundaries and decolonize sociology, a timely and urgent project of our days. Thank you.